Imagine for a second, like you are a world-class architect.
Go ahead.
You've spent your entire life designing this absolute masterpiece of a building right down to the final millimeter. The blueprints are totally flawless.
Right.
But instead of actually getting to build it, you are strapped into the passenger seat of this massive diesel bulldozer. You're completely paralyzed, and sitting in the driver's seat is a toddler.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and this toddler is blindly driving that bulldozer straight through your creation. You can see everything going wrong. You feel every impact as the steel blades just crush the foundation you laid. But you can't move your hands to grab the controls.
That is, yeah, that's intense.
Right. What if the greatest pain ever experienced in human history wasn't physical at all, but exactly that feeling? Like intense, suffocating agony of being completely trapped inside someone else's choices.
It's a profoundly unsettling image. I mean, it really is. But it captures the exact emotional and spiritual baseline of the material we are analyzing today.
Hmm.
Because the text you brought us completely flips the conventional understanding of suffering.
Yeah, it really does.
It shifts it from something that happens to a physical body into something that happens within the invisible architecture of reality itself.
Exactly. So, welcome to this deep dive, everyone. Today, we are looking at an incredibly striking piece of source material. It's this theological text dated November 19th, 1926.
From the Book of Heaven, right?
Yes, exactly. It's found in volume 20 of this massive work containing the writings of a 20th century mystic named Luisa Picaretta. And the specific theme we're looking at today is the agony and triumph of the divine will.
And just to set the parameters for you, the listener, our mission here is to explore this highly unique mystical framework. We are looking at this text objectively, to understand a 20th century perspective that attempts to completely reinterpret human suffering.
The chaos of human society, the hidden state of the divine within us, all of it.
Right. And we aren't here to endorse the theology, but rather to unpack the internal logic of a fascinating historical document, because it makes some incredibly bold claims about the mechanics of human agency.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the text doesn't just say the divine is, I don't know, sad or disappointed when humanity messes up. It uses a very specific visceral word,
Agony.
agony. And to understand what this text means by the agony of the divine will, we really have to look at how it reinterprets one of the most famous historical moments of suffering on record, which is the Garden of Gethsemane.
Yeah, so if you have any familiarity with the Christian narrative, you know the traditional story. Jesus is in the garden on the night before his arrest, and he is in such immense psychological and physical distress that he actually sweats blood.
Right, that's a real medical condition, isn't it?
It is, yeah. The standard historical and theological interpretation usually points to a medical condition called hematidrosis, and that's brought on by the sheer terror of the impending physical torture.
The scourging, the cross, all of it.
Exactly. The anticipation of the physical pain is so intense that his capillaries literally burst.
See, and that is what I was always taught. The ultimate suffering was the anticipation of the ultimate physical violence. But the text from the Book of Heaven explicitly rejects that framing.
It totally does.
It claims the sweat of blood had absolutely nothing to do with the fear of the Romans or the wood of the cross.
Right. It completely pivots the source of the trauma. The text argues that the true cause of the agony was actually the crushing, suffocating weight of the divine will being trapped and suppressed by the human will across all generations of time.
It's just wild to think about.
I mean, the author operates on this premise that the divine inherently exists inside every creature. But instead of humanity allowing that divine will to breathe, to have dominion and to actually live its life within them as an active agent, humans constantly suppress it.
We put it in a straitjacket.
Yes, we basically put it in the straitjacket.
So going back to that architect analogy, we are the toddler driving the bulldozer, and we are forcing the architect to just sit there and watch us destroy the blueprints.
That captures the mechanics of it perfectly. We refuse to let the divine act. We force it to merely serve our own whims, essentially holding it hostage to sustain our existence.
Well, we use that existence to act against its very nature.
Exactly. So the agony in the garden, according to this 1926 text, is the spiritual suffocation of a divine force. A force that is constantly being forced to participate in human actions that contradict its very essence.
Wow.
It is an internal relational trauma on a cosmic scale, rather than a physical trauma inflicted by soldiers.
What's wild about that is how it changes the entire definition of what constitutes the ultimate sacrifice.
Well, what's fascinating here is how the text uses a specific contrast in the historical narrative to prove this exact point. In the garden, Jesus says that famous line, "Let this cup pass."
Right.
Traditional interpretations say the cup is the crucifixion. But according to this text, he wasn't talking about the physical torture the next day at all.
He was.
No, he was specifically referring to this unbearable internal agony of the trapped, suffocating divine will. The text points out a glaring behavioral contradiction, which is that later, when he is actually on the physical cross experiencing the absolute peak of bodily torture, he never once asks for the pain to pass.
He actually says the opposite. He says, "I thirst."
Right. The text interprets "I thirst" as an active desire for the physical pain and for the souls it would redeem. He embraces the physical cross. He leans into it.
But the internal agony in the garden, the spiritual suffocation of the divine will being trapped by human selfishness over centuries.
The text claims it was a pain so incomprehensible, so fundamentally contrary to the nature of God, that it was the only time he ever asked for relief. It suggests that physical torture is basically a paper cut compared to the metaphysical trauma of a suppressed will.
Wait, so if this agony is caused by the divine will being trapped inside humanity, how exactly does that play out in our daily lives? Does the divine will just sit there and take it? Like if it's trapped in the passenger seat, is it just silent?
Oh, the text asserts that it is far from silent. The author transitions from a historical analysis of Gethsemane into a very sharp, almost psychological critique of human behavior today.
Okay.
She makes a brilliant distinction between two states that the divine will is forced into by humans: agony and lethargy, or essentially a coma.
Let's focus on agony first.
Sure.
Because the text says that in worldly people, people who are just going about their lives, prioritizing their own desires without much thought for spiritual matters, the divine will is in agony. It isn't passive. It writhes.
Yes, it struggles, pushes back against the confines of the human will.
And the mechanics of this writhing are crucial to understand, right?
Totally. The text argues that we actually feel this writhing in our daily lives, but we misdiagnose it. Like when you feel the sudden pang of conscience.
Or when you feel a deep, unexplainable frustration with your life.
Exactly. When you encounter sudden obstacles or you just feel a profound weariness and tiredness of your daily routine, the text argues that these are not just psychological states or, chemical imbalances or bad luck.
It is literally the friction of the trapped divine will writhing inside you.
It is a deliberate wake-up call. The divine is making itself uncomfortable so that you feel uncomfortable.
Wow.
The goal of this friction is to make you realize the inherent emptiness of your own choices, hoping you will finally hand over the steering wheel. The agony is a functional tool used to break the human illusion of control.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because you would logically assume that the worldly people are the worst-case scenario in a mystical religious text like this.
You think so, yeah.
But the author introduces a massive plot twist. The situation is actually infinitely worse for the religious folks. The clergy, the pious, the people who call themselves Catholic but secretly act entirely on their own human will.
Right. For that demographic, the divine will isn't just in agony. It is put into a coma. The text uses the term lethargy, describing a state of complete immobility.
It is like wearing the costume of a saint while acting like a CEO building a personal brand.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Like, you're checking all the boxes, you're doing the good works, wearing the right clothes, saying the right prayers, but the engine driving it isn't a surrender to the divine. The engine is vanity.
It's self-esteem.
Exactly. It's wanting other people to look at you and say, wow, what an incredibly holy person.
The author is making a devastating critique of performative morality here. The text is incredibly severe. It claims that if you keep up the outward shell of religion, but your internal motivation is your own human will, your actions are completely empty of divine life.
Just totally hollow.
Yes, they might look beautiful on the outside, but metaphysically they are a puff of smoke.
Wait, I struggle with that a bit. Are you saying someone who volunteers at a soup kitchen just to build their resume or to feel good about themselves is spiritually in a worse state than someone who sits on the couch and actively ignores the poor? How does doing a good deed for selfish reason actually put the divine in a coma?
It really comes down to how the internal alarm system of the conscience operates. In the worldly person who makes an obviously selfish mistake, say stealing or lying.
Right. The divine will has an outlet.
Exactly. It can cause a pang of guilt, The person knows they did something wrong, and that cognitive dissonance is the divine will writhing, trying to wake them up.
But the person at the soup kitchen doesn't feel guilt.
Precisely the opposite. The person who uses good deeds to build their own ego feels intensely self-righteous. They think they're doing great.
So they've entirely silenced the internal alarm system.
Right, by masking their selfishness in the camouflage of virtue. The divine will can't even writhe to wake them up, because the human will has built an impenetrable fortress of fake holiness around itself.
That is wild.
The divine is completely anesthetized, rendered completely immobile. The text calls this a state of continuous death, because there is no friction left to spark a genuine awakening.
That is a deeply uncomfortable mirror to look into. It demands a brutal audit of our own internal motivations. But the text doesn't stop at the individual level, does it?
No, it scales this entire concept up.
Right. Because if the suppression of the divine will causes internal pangs of conscience in one person, what happens when millions of people are suffocating the divine over centuries?
Well, it creates a metaphysical pressure cooker. This leads us to the text's macro-level view of human society and cosmic order. The author describes humanity without the reigning divine will as houses without order.
Everything is upside down.
Everything. The text goes so far as to say this spiritual disorder emits a stench worse than a decaying corpse.
That is a visceral image, but it is vital for understanding how this framework explains the chaos of the physical world. The text draws a direct causal line between this invisible spiritual suffocation and visible physical worldly turmoil.
We really have to remember the foundational physics of this specific theology. The divine will is not just a moral guideline. It is the literal organizing principle of the universe.
The gravity that holds it all together.
Exactly, both the moral and physical cosmos. So when humanity collectively forces it into the passenger seat, the foundational architecture of reality is compromised.
Okay, wait.
So when the listener turns on the news and sees crumbling cities, societal destruction, unprecedented chaos, or natural disasters, the text argues something highly counterintuitive.
I have to push back here, though. Because saying a hurricane or a societal collapse is the kinetic energy of a writhing divine will, that sounds an awful lot like the ancient idea of an angry god punishing us with lightning bolts.
I know, it does sound like that at first glance.
Right, just rebranded for a 20th century mystic. How is this actually any different from the primitive concept of divine retribution?
Well, the distinction really lies in the mechanics of cause and effect. An angry god throwing lightning bolts implies an external emotional reaction. A deity looks down, gets mad at a transgression, and decides to throw a punishment down from the clouds.
Okay.
But the framework in the Book of Heaven describes an internal structural reaction.
Like structural fatigue in a bridge.
Yes, that is a perfect parallel. The macro disasters are the exact same mechanism as your micro pangs of conscience. They are the violent writhing of the divine will on a planetary scale.
Because the divine has been suffocated for centuries.
Right. It is exhausted from being trapped in the agony of human selfishness. It is thrashing to break free. And because humanity won't willingly give it space to breathe, the sheer kinetic energy of its writhing manifests as physical and societal upheaval.
So it is not a punishment sent from outside.
No, it is the fundamental operating system of the universe crashing, because the human malware has overloaded the servers.
So what does this all mean? The text is essentially framing societal collapse as the inevitable, explosive pushback of an underlying universal order. We have tried to keep gravity in a chokehold, and gravity is finally snapping back.
Exactly.
The Earth itself is shuddering under the weight of this collective spiritual suffocation, which is terrifying, but it also prompts the ultimate question: if it's breaking out, where does this all lead?
It leads to a definitive ultimatum. The text makes it clear that the centuries-long agony is reaching its absolute limit.
The divine will is demanding its freedom.
And its rightful dominion. It will no longer stay in the passenger seat of the bulldozer. It is going to take the wheel. The only variable left in this equation is how that transition of power occurs. And the text lays out two distinct paths forward for humanity.
Two paths that represent fundamentally different ways of experiencing the exact same event.
Right. The first is what the text calls the path of triumph, or the path of love. This is the path for those who are willing to recognize what is happening and voluntarily adapt. The text emphasizes a concept of accepting the knowledges of the divine will.
Let's define knowledges here, because it sounds like just reading a book or memorizing some theology, but the text implies something much heavier.
Oh, absolutely. In this framework, knowledges are not merely intellectual facts you memorize. They are profound spiritual realizations that permanently alter your operating system.
So to accept the knowledges means you deeply internalize the reality that your own human will is structurally incapable of producing true good.
Right. You recognize the agony you have been causing,
Yeah.
and once you have that knowledge, you willingly surrender. You voluntarily hand over the keys. You consciously invite the divine will to act as the primary agent in your thoughts, your actions, and your heartbeat.
And if you do that, the divine will emerges triumphantly and peacefully within you. There's no violence, only a profound integration.
Exactly.
But then there's path two.
Yes, path two, the path of justice. This is for those who stubbornly refuse the knowledges, for those who will not acknowledge the divine will as a triumphant force of love. The text says that if you will not hand over the keys voluntarily, the divine will is still going to take the wheel.
But you will experience that takeover through the purification of trials.
Right, through the very worldly collapse and writhing we just talked about, you will be forced to recognize its power because the structures of your own human will,
Your ego, your performative morality.
your societal safety nets, all of it is going to be violently dismantled. It is the difference between opening the door when someone knocks versus forcing them to kick the door down because the house is on fire and you refuse to believe there is smoke.
Wow.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, what we're really talking about is the ultimate respect for human agency. The text isn't describing a fatalistic doomsday where humanity is just wiped out by a frustrated deity.
The choice of which path humanity takes, which path you take, is left entirely up to the creatures themselves.
It is the ultimate expression of free will, deciding exactly how it is going to encounter the divine. As a welcome guest arriving in peace, or as a shattering force of nature demanding its rightful space.
That brings everything right back to you, the listener. The key takeaway from this deep dive isn't just a grand theological history. It is a highly personal mirror held right up to your face.
It challenges you to look past your own religious shell.
Right, to look past the saint costume, the good outward deeds you do for praise, and ask, who is actually driving my actions? Am I acting to make myself feel important, or am I actually stepping aside and letting the divine breathe through me?
Because the stakes presented in the text are incredibly high. Every time you choose the former, you aren't just making a harmless everyday mistake. You are actively contributing to the suffocation of the very source of reality. You are putting the divine into a coma.
It is a framework that makes every mundane decision feel cosmically significant. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. A modern application of this 1926 text that we haven't even touched on yet.
Oh, this is an interesting angle.
Right. Because the entire crisis described in this book stems from humanity's stubborn refusal to give up its own will. But look at the world today. We are suddenly more than happy to outsource our daily choices, our creativity, and our problem solving to artificial intelligence and algorithms.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
We are actively training ourselves to surrender our agency to a higher invisible network. If the collective human will has spent centuries suffocating the divine because of its pride, what happens when we finally decide to surrender our ego, but we surrender it to an algorithm instead of the divine?
That is a terrifying thought.
Are we accidentally building a third digital layer of suffocation? Or is our modern reliance on AI actually a bizarre, twisted mirror of our deep, unacknowledged craving to finally let something else take the wheel? Think about who or what is sitting in the driver's seat of your bulldozer tomorrow morning.